Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you all for inviting me into your meeting today. I am thrilled to be here, and it was really energizing to hear the presentations and the awards, because the work that I do, I have this wonderful opportunity to live at the intersection between academic world and the world of work. So we work with corporations. I work with people who typically have titles like Chief Learning Officer or Chief Talent Officer, and they're grappling with making sense of a world of rapid change, and in a world where they're responsible for the learning and development for tens of thousands of people, in many cases in the large organizations, and making sense of this world. And you know, I'm struck with a problem today that exists, that's something that we've been taking a look at, and that is the employers are looking to hire 3.5 million people today. That's how many open jobs there are right here in the United States, yet we have nearly 13 million people unemployed. And so it begs the question, how do we have a broken education to employment link? And where is the disconnect? And so we've gotten together with groups of people to study that disconnect. And I thought before I give you the answer, I would just tee up a couple of thoughts, ideas, and facts that sort of set the stage for some of this. And first I'm going to point out, so Klaus Schwab founded the World Economic Forum. They run a famous conference in Davos for the economists, the dismal science. And I found this interesting. So we're working with them. We just had a conference on this education to employment link breakage. But I found this interesting that in Davos, filled with world leaders and corporate leaders, that we had a quote that said capital, so they all think of land, labor, and capital as the key economic drivers of industry. That's the way it's been for centuries. But capital is being superseded by creativity and the ability to innovate. And therefore, it's talent and the idea of capitalism being replaced by talentism. That concept just blows me away, because I can't imagine a bunch of economists studying the dismal science, thinking about the power of people and talent and creativity and innovation as the factor and means of production for the future. So I find that fascinating. And then further, just put it into perspective. So the PwC, these are surveys of CEOs. So let's look at industry and how businesses are being run. Over 70% of CEOs in the PwC survey say they don't have the talent they need to operate their business in the very near term, the next 3 years. PwC being PricewaterhouseCoopers. The Conference Board survey, internal talent development, developing the people in the business. Number 2 issue, BCG, Boston Consulting Group, did a big study. Again, I found this really interesting. 72% list innovation as the top priority. It's the highest score they've ever seen when conducting this study annually. And companies that master innovation, they would claim, outperform the rest in the market. And then finally, DDI, a company that studies leadership development, they track number 2 topic in their study, developing future talent. Number 3, innovation and creativity. So again, we're seeing that this theme is coming up, and it's powerful. And so this is just one other point. The world of work is changing, and we do hear this idea of how do we develop people today for jobs that don't exist yet, to learn about technologies that don't exist yet. Well, this one finally solidified it for me. So I've been looking at the studies on leadership development and how companies identify and develop their employees and their future leaders, and how do they build that bench. But now there's this disconnect. It doesn't appear to be working. And so it's very interesting when you see what's number 1 and number 2, number 3. This year in 2011, the survey, what came out was critical thinking, creative thinking, strategic thinking, problem solving, decision making. And look where that stood over the last 13 years, or the last 11 years. It never even made the list. And so we have seen a significant shift in the corporate world, in industry, to think about problem solving and critical thinking and teaching people the art of getting to the root cause, solving the problem. The things that you all know intrinsically, those things that have not made it to the leadership world and the so-called soft skill world, are now becoming core. They're high priority, and businesses are radically struggling to make sense with this changed world. And so the learning function leader, or the chief human resource or learning officer, they have all these inputs, massive people coming to them. We need programs for this and that, and mergers and acquisitions. And their job is to weave that all together into a coherent strategy that in some of the companies that we work with have 1 million employees that they have to develop to put that all together. And I can tell you that the old way of assess, design, develop, implement, and evaluate a program that might take a year or two to design and build a program. And I know I've said this in the academic world, and people say, well, it takes us 5 years to get a program approved. Well, if it takes 1 in the corporate world, I'm telling you right now, the future is getting faster. We're talking 2 months. That's what we see. And so the world of work is changing. So we live in a connected world. We work in connected businesses, and we lead connected lives. I would guess that since we sell somewhere on the order of 1 billion or so smartphones or mobile handsets a year, everybody has one and has a connected lifestyle. So we lead a connected life, we work in a connected business, we live in a connected world, and I will tell you that we do not have a connected model of learning that is pervasive or used, and it exacerbates the idea that there's an education to employment link. I would argue it's not even a link, it's an ecosystem. And that our whole conception of the model is fundamentally flawed. And so businesses used a 20th century model to manage work called the hierarchy. It still works. There's been these debates about hierarchies and networks. And what I would say to you is that we see the idea of a network laying on top of a hierarchy. And I also believe that there's a new model for teaching and learning that will look like a network or a connected model of learning that will radically transform the way we teach and learn, and that we have that promise in the future, and that we're only beginning to take those first steps today, building on what we learned about using machines to teach and learn over the last 10 or 15 years. But I think we stand at a whole new opportunity. So if I asked you today, or I'll just tell you, in the corporate world, people are being asked to work in communities of practice, right? It's industry day today, and I loved the idea of the papers that were selected. Did you notice that there were examples of collaborative pedagogy? Did you notice that they were experiential? Did you notice that they were using real-world problems or problem-based? This is how industry is doing internal talent development. They're trying to build things that create those realistic, experiential, context-driven, problem-based, project-based learning interventions. So we're working in networked hierarchies now, and we need a model of learning that supports virtual teams, community of practice, that type of thing. We did a quick study. I just threw this slide in because I thought I'd give you something. One of the big topics for the promise of a potential solution is the idea of massive open online courses, and that the idea that we can start to increase access and improve affordability, which is one of the biggest problems in higher education. I know from spending the last couple of years on the Higher Education Commission in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I sit on that commission with the presidents of our institutions in the state, so Penn State, Pitt, so on, are involved. And I know that there's a lot of talk about MOOCs. So we did a survey to chief learning officers in large organizations, just did a quick question and said, how many of you are interested in exploring the idea of MOOCs for business? And I was shocked. We actually asked more questions than this, but I pulled one off. I was shocked that 94% were interested, in that there were only 6% of respondents in a high sample rate that said they were not interested in knowing how might I best think about and apply this concept of massive open online corporate courses, and how might I integrate that in my world of work. So we held a conference on this back in May and studied this topic, but I wanted to let you know that from industry, they're interested in improving access and affordability to corporate learning just as well. And so how do they make sense of this world? Again, just one more simple example. This one sometimes drives people crazy, but what I thought I would show you, I pulled this out of a report from an investment bank. The top blue line is our investment in K-12 education in the United States, and the bottom two lines that are together and flat are the reading and math scores over the last 40 years. And so what this slide clearly shows, throwing more money at the problem in education is not necessarily the way to solve it. So the way we're going to solve these problems today, and I can describe the education to employment link, I could say that nearly half the students that start out on a bachelor's degree don't finish. I can tell you that the ones that do persist, a slightly over a majority, and get that degree, that nearly half of them are unemployed. If you add in how many of them are underemployed, I read the fact that there are 117,000 janitors with a bachelor's degree, I believe. I understand that we have a plethora of PhD baristas at Starbucks across the nation. So there's clearly something going on. And as a result of that problem, it starts to exacerbate this issue of cost. And everybody says that affordability is broken. What I would say to you is that it's a payback issue. For those that persisted and got that college degree, for every dollar they earn, their counterparts that didn't persist will earn 67 cents. Do the math every year for 40 years of your work, and you'll understand that there's an increasingly have and have not world between those that get and don't get that bachelor's degree. So it's really important that we reconceptualize and rethink this whole concept of what it looks like, and we know we can't throw money at the problem. There we go. So hopefully you can see this picture, but I thought I would just give you a little contrast. So transportation then, transportation now. You look at medicine and the improvements that were made over the last 100 years or so. Lighting, if you look at how that has transformed our lives. Warfare, I like this picture because I live near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It's the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, so it's kind of a big deal right now. And 150 years ago today, this is what it looked like to fight a war, and today it looks like, guided drone, stealth bombers, communications then, communications now. And this is the revolution in education that we've got. This is what it looks like a couple hundred years later in most of the classrooms in America. And by the way, when we look at executive education and management and leadership development, guess what it looks like? Exactly that. So people talk about online education, but I'll tell you this right now. Our first conception of online education, it's got the 1.0 problem. Do you know what the 1.0 problem is? When you create new disruptive technology, you tend to reinvent it in the paradigm of what you know, which is that which came before it, right? So the first movies were filmed plays, right? And the first TVs had radio shows on television. And I love this concept from education research that when a fish looks up and sees a bird in the sky and the other fish says, "What is that?" He says, "That's a fish with wings." And the idea is that the 1.0 problem is it's very difficult to reconceptualize. And what I will tell you is we just finished the last 10 or 15 years of technology-assisted education, and we're moving into a transformational 1.0 to a 2.0. And we're making sense of a socially constructed world, a social knowledge construction, and the idea of a connected learning model where we connect people together and better use technology. And actually, we're seeing it happen in executive education, management, and leadership development. I think we have huge promise and opportunity within engineering education, and I think the best work, obviously, is being recognized by ASEE. And so I think you are on the cutting edge or on the front end of some of these future areas. And so I think it's potential for transformation. Finally, the half-life of what you need to know to do your job. So Robert Kelly at Carnegie Mellon studies this thing. And so what's the percentage of knowledge needed to do your job that you keep in your brain? And you can see that 20 some odd years ago, you could keep almost 80% of what you needed to know to do your job. Today, maybe it's 10%. Sometimes we debate the methodologies and say, could it be 15 or 5? The point is the half-life of knowledge and even the half-life of facts continues to get shorter. And in a world of increasing business cycles and accelerating exponential change, I don't think we can expect any other inputs to come at us, so we've got to rethink how we get after it. And then top 3 issues in learning technology. So the Chronicle of Higher Education just put this out, and I thought just to sort of weave it in. This first concept of course redesign, what this is all about is part of, and this was the #1 issue with 95% selecting that as the issue in higher education. And the idea of course redesign here is this second generation version of learning. And that is when we work with faculty, we've got to completely redesign the concept of a lecture. So the next generation of the world, it isn't about capturing a lecture. It's not about capturing a lecture. It's a completely different model. And so we also need to make sense of MOOCs, and we've got to make sense of the analysis of the outcomes of learning. So there haven't been many great academic studies, randomized controlled trials in educational outcomes. Again, I think that you're all pushing the envelope on some of the examples, and that's an area where everyone wants to get better. So the way we think about it from the world of work is that no classroom is big enough to hold all the students in a company that need to learn. There's no teacher smart enough. It's not one person. There's no subject matter expert in the company that knows everything. And they can't do it fast enough, and they can't get everybody together in the same room. The constraints of business, if we do finally figure it out and teach that, it'll change. The world will change. Customers and partners and the universe, the world, will get in the way, and that'll cause problems. So what we did in 2008, so it was about 5 years ago, we formed a social learning executive council. Its original premise was there's an explosion of social media out there. How do we make sense of this with these companies? And we got together and convened a series of meetings, did probably 48 virtual meetings over 60 months. And we continued to meet. We do some studies, quantitative and qualitative, but I'll say this, to make sense of the whole idea of social media, you've got to block from your mind the thought that these people have, and I heard it earlier in one of the papers, that we're not thinking, how do I use Facebook and Twitter for learning, right? So we don't think of that. We think of how do we use what those technologies represent. How do we use microblogging? How do we use the idea of creating connected profiles and connecting people together to make sense? And we came up with a definition, and our definition for social learning, again, not the academic definition. There is an academic definition, but I'll submit this is our practical definition. And our practical definition is to connect people together in groups, in communities, call it what you like, but the idea is the critical element is connection. And we connect them together to solve complex problems, generate and spread ideas, teach and learn, capture, codify, and share knowledge for reuse later. That's our definition. This is the holy grail of the problem that I would submit to you. Large organizations, this is what they're trying to do. This is the problem they're trying to solve. This is an intervention that would allow learning leaders to transform and not be in the business of taking a year to build a course, but being in the business of connecting people together and letting them learn peer-to-peer, peer-to-expert. So this quick picture, informal to formal, is a way that we think about learning in the world. So there are formal approaches, informal approaches, and there's that which we do by ourselves, alone, and that which we do in a group. And what I will say to you is that the left half of this is where, in the world of online technology-mediated learning, we worked on the left half for the 1.0 version for the last 15 years of education. A lot of the experiences using any kind of course management system or technology was still constructing an alone experience. So even if you went online to read a syllabus, download homework, do it alone and upload it, that is the model for the left-hand side, working alone. And even in a guided paced environment where we're working alone, it is very difficult to persist, very difficult to keep people focused, very difficult to get anybody to ever watch a 1-hour captured lecture asynchronously later. It just doesn't happen. In fact, the completion rates, we look at self-paced e-learning, we've seen completion rates in massive open online courses that use this kind of a loan experience, even though you're connecting in with 50,000 of your closest friends. Completion rates there around 4%, maybe 5%, some 6%, some 7%. But the studies, we've been tracking that pretty closely. And in the corporate world, there's a couple of commercial products that are widely used in self-paced e-learning. They're getting around 8 or 9%. So the company's buying an online e-learning program for their employees. They're making it available to the employees. And of all the employees that access it and start, 90% of them never finish. They don't finish. And they spend the money. So what I would also tell you is that on the right-hand side, where we've been playing and running experiments with these companies and running experiments with academic programs. So we've done some programs right now with MIT. We did the Harvard program on negotiation, and we reimagine it from the ground up. And then we put it in a guided PACE cohort and virtual learning community, a virtual community of practice to blend formal and informal together. And so we go up and down, but the key is that it's a connected model. Peer-to-peer social construction of new knowledge, connecting people together, working on problems, and that by doing that, we're seeing 80 to 90% outcomes of people persisting through completion. And of course, it gets even better if you use action learning or experiential approaches to cause them to frame real-world problems that they work on, and you use the course as a lens through which you do real work on your day job. And so then the return on investment or payback, it's very interesting. So when you're trying to say, how do I make sense of this? Great, I want the connected thing. This was another problem. The next thing is this many vendors. There's this many, again, that pop up every 6 months that have some kind of cool tool. So it's very difficult to make sense of how do I integrate these tools to put that all together. And so we have to think about that. It's hard to put together. And then finally, just a framework for how we connect people together. And so we said, generating ideas, solve complex problems. We started to put together a little cookbook. And we asked people, when you're solving a business challenge, learning related, and we think learning should be problem-based. In the first column on the far left, tell us what your definition of the problem is. Is it you're trying to sell more product or serve customers better or get people to work better in teams? And then let's go through some process of, did we solve a problem? Did we do some kind of a project with ideation? Are we generating ideas? Is it a teaching and learning intervention? And then within each of these, we thought we'd start to put different cookbook recipes together, if you will, for building some best practices for these. And we've actually built, this is just one sample one, but we've worked with a bunch of companies like Microsoft and Pearson Education to sort of build these different cookbooks with interventions that they're putting together in their corporations. So the big idea for learning with learning leaders in the corporate world, and we'll translate it to our world here today, and that is we must shift our mindset from being a training provider that assess, design, develop, implement, and evaluate a program, and all the business requirements are coming at us and we have to build more programs and build them faster. We can't keep up anymore. We've got to switch from being a training provider to a learning enabler. And as a learning enabler, our job is to unlock the potential, the massive potential, the collective genius that exists within the entire enterprise. And so as we think about that shift, it changes our role. I'm not a course builder anymore. I'm responsible for creating the conditions and shaping the environment for learning to occur. Peer-to-peer, peer-to-expert, to build those communities, to pick the tools, the technologies, and the infrastructure, and give them the cookbooks so that your people can go solve the problem themselves. And teach them problem solving, and teach them critical thinking, and teach them to self-organize. 9 times out of 10, the knowledge you need to solve the problem, the complex, wicked problems facing your business today, it exists already inside your business. And for the pieces that exist outside of your business, if you think about inviting them into certain virtual communities of practice, you can come up to a better answer. And so we think there is a better way to get to the right answer to the toughest problems and challenges facing business and industry today. And we think it is that social constructed knowledge, but it's a connected 21st century model of teaching and learning. It is machine enhanced and virtual. And I'm going to just leave you with a simple acronym, DOTS. When I look at programs, and I talk to companies or I talk to schools, and they say, we want to build an online program, I think about design, outcomes, technology, and strategy. Those are the ways we evaluate programs. And we think that corporations need to build a new set of skills in a corporate learning function. So many large organizations might have 50, 100, 500 people in corporate learning. We work with oil and gas companies that spend $1 billion a year on education, internal for their own employees. In fact, companies are spending about $160, $170 billion a year. So we think that there's a huge opportunity for the academic world to be much more tightly integrated into that giant money bucket, if you think about it like an economist, where the academic world and the practical world are working together in more of a learning ecosystem, not education to industry link or whatever the term is. So we think about design, outcomes, technology, and strategy. And so design, there are sort of 3 subsets within just the world of design that we believe you need to master to get this right. The first and most important is probably learning design. Learning design, as I pointed out in a prior slide from a Chronicle of Higher Education study, #1 biggest issue. If I'm going to use technology to connect people together in a 21st century learning model, I've got to completely redesign my course. Flipped classroom exacerbates this problem. The first time somebody tries to flip a classroom, I go in, I do an hour lecture. It's great. I do that for 12 or 13 or 14 weeks. I put that all together. I've got a great class. So we sit down with the faculty. Great. Let's walk through the first hour lecture. Give me just the teaching. I don't need the stories. I need to understand the teaching points because I have media designers in the room that do nothing but shoot and edit and produce video. And they want to do a multiple camera shoot so it looks like TV, new style, 60-minute story. So we're trying to bring those kind of production values to the media design, to the way we'd create a course. The learning designer is focused on what are the teaching points and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. The media designer's thinking about the different ways we're going to frame this as a story, because that's the only way we're going to hold their attention when we build an online course, is if we bring a story-based approach to this. And so what I'll tell you is that we're used to, they email us the course and say, oh, it's great, I got it all done, here's my lecture, and we get an email with 300 PowerPoint slides. So that's the start point, okay? That's why we have to redesign learning design from scratch, to rethink the whole idea from a problem-based, project-based, team-based, collaborative-based, social construction of knowledge-based. And so on the learning design thing, we go multimodal. We'll ask them to watch something and then read something and then reflect and perhaps work in a group discussion on something. Create a breakout group and use breakout groups online. And then go back into a broader group and have another conversation. Do a live virtual meeting and have a Socratic dialogue led by a faculty or subject matter expert that is unpacking the information. So we use a lot of the tools from the user experience design world. So there's a whole discipline of user experience design for how humans use computers. And it's stunningly void in the world of online education and learning. We force people to go through learning management systems and traverse menus and till they're into the learning, it takes 5, 7, 10, 15, we've heard 20 minutes of trying to navigate menus to figure out where it is I'm supposed to be to get some learning. I can tell you that in the workplace, people give up really quick. And we see that as continuing. And so we've got to rethink user experience design. So outcomes, there are lots of ways to measure outcomes. We can do surveys and measure, did they learn something? We can quiz, we can test, we can ask if they would recommend it. In the corporate world, the Net Promoter Score for learning is a good one. So you're a good, responsible adult professional in the workplace. Was this a good use of your time? It's a great question to ask, and would you recommend it to your peers and colleagues? And that work is pretty predictably reliable, but we think there's huge opportunity to use the world of analytics and also learn from the world of publishing that because of the informal learning, the idea of these virtual communities of practice, virtual learning communities, that we think that there's a huge opportunity to look at how do we reach people and how many people within a population did we penetrate and how do we engage, how do we entice subject matter experts to become publishers. So whether it's through taping something, teaching something, publishing a PowerPoint, whatever it is, we need to help create those, and we use analytics to study how people are adopting the virtual technologies. On the technology side, I think it's important to think about platforms, environments, and tools. And platforms are those things that you buy that you're going to live with for a really, really long time. Environments we think of as the world, like social learning and collaborative learning environments now, are a different class of product. It's a teaching and learning product that you might adopt and then get people in your institution to use. And then tools, we think tools are something that every faculty member or subject matter expert in a workplace setting or a virtual learning community, they should get to pick and choose the tools that they use at the time of delivery, anything along a toolkit that they want to use. Just like you would say, I control my classroom, I want my whiteboard, I want my markers, I want my projector. We think in the social constructed world, we've got to think about platforms, environments, and tools. And then strategy, this is just 2 strategy slides. A connected learning strategy, we think that there's a way to blend off-the-shelf content and materials, the prior art that exists in the world, best thinking integrated in the academic world, with internal best practices pulled from a company in a blended model. And then finally, this blended hybrid epic. I'm going to leave you with this as my last and final slide, and then if we have time, we might take questions. And the idea that we start with an assessment, it's personalized on the top left. On the top right, it's solving a real business issue, so this is framed. We just presented this model with Coca-Cola at Columbia University last week in an academic conference where they received an award for doing a project. We use social learning as the glue to hold it all together. And you see we have residential and virtual learning. So we think of blended as blending synchronous and asynchronous virtual learning. We think there's a huge opportunity there. And then we think of hybrid as blending virtual and face-to-face. So I think there are huge opportunities for you to do synchronous and asynchronous experiments, as well as hybrid face-to-face residential experience and leveraging technology to create a better experience. But if we can personalize this, and if we can tie it to real-world problems, we know that we can create the best kind of outcomes. That's all. Thank you very much for your time.
Alan is willing to take a few questions. There are microphones in the room. If you do have a question, please use the microphone so that we can all hear.
Does that mean it's time for lunch?
I have a question. I just had to walk back to get to the microphone.
Here we go.
Gotcha.
So we can think of our academic institutions as like a corporation, and we have to accelerate change in terms of how we teach. And I've tried to sort of formulate some of these communities of practices within faculty, but I've struggled with what's the right tool. You know, there's wikis and Moodle, and I can't find a good tool, even on my own campus, for these community of practices. Could you give us some examples of what might be good to form these networks?
Yes, that's a great question. It is a very difficult question to answer, and I'll tell you why. Because when we think about virtual communities of practice, the first thing that we jump into with them typically is technology. And we say, okay, I need a tool. And the problem is, by our estimates, about 2/3 of communities of practice fail to get traction, right? So companies invest a lot of money in this, but a supermajority of them don't work. They just never reach escape velocity. And so what I've seen, there are ways to start. So what I'll give you is a way to think about it and a strategy. And I would encourage you to think about DOTS, design, outcomes, technologies, and strategies. But one of the things that we've seen is if you would start with something really simple in this community of practice, very informal, and and create something like we're going to have meetups. And we're going to have a different topic each month in the meetup. And we'll do a live 1-hour presentation. Again, in the corporate world, what people are doing is a webinar-style presentation. And that the organizer, the catalyst for the community of practice, your job is to think about the things top down. I'm going to have content presentations once a month or every other month or once a quarter, I'm going to have a presentation from a subject matter expert on a topic that matters to the community. I'm going to provide you a space. So an example would be Google Hangouts. We work with the International Red Cross in Geneva, Switzerland, and they're using Google Hangouts as an example of building learning communities of volunteers in the humanitarian world to put them together. So the idea of this top-down approach, some structured content that you bring to the community of practice, call that the cathedral, and then some amount, we'll call this the bazaar, where we need people to contribute. We need to ask them to contribute to the community of practice. And again, whether we use a wiki tool, whether we use a blog platform, whether we use Google Hangouts, there's a whole bunch of tools in the corporate marketplace that go by the names of Yammer, Chatter, Jive. People are using all of those as technology tools, but I will tell you that you still, in my opinion, have a 66% chance of not being successful regardless of the tool you pick. I would encourage you to think about the top-down cathedral and the bazaar. My cathedral, I want to have planned meetups, maybe once a quarter, once every other month. I want to be structured with some content. I want to get some good outside essays or thoughtful articles and some dialogue going. And my bazaar is I want to make sure people are loading their ideas and sharing. And so I need to encourage and reward and recognize sharing. Those are the strategies that I would recommend.
Thank you.
In the middle.
Yes, mine is kind of a two-part question. So we have subject matter experts at the university that want to get the correct information out, as opposed to a lot of different circulating information that may or may not be correct. But they also are getting pushback from corporations to give it in 15-minute sound bites. So can you tell us how to make those two things work and still get people all the information they need?
Yeah, well, you pose a very interesting dilemma. Gosh, you guys are asking the hard questions. So these are like the ones that are like, of course I love them because they're wicked problems, right? So we love to solve wicked problems, but the way to solve them is by getting a group of people and crowdsourcing some ideas, putting them in buckets. So I can't give you the only answer myself, but I would say this. We know that we need shorter answers, and we work with faculty. It's really important to break down, if we're going to give them something in material, let's say it's media design, it's going to be, we're going to give them a video and it needs to be in 15 minutes. I think the practical reality is it's back to the way humans use computers. I would say that the secret lies in the idea of mode shifting, right? So we call it multimodal learning. Watch a 5-minute video where somebody gives you an explanation. Have a reading, not a 24-page case, but maybe 2 or 3. And again, we can't say dumb down because people think this all means dumb down. Dumb down is not the answer. We can't dumb down knowledge and thinking. But I would say that if we're going to use computers to mediate our relationship with school and industry, because we're not all able to get in a room and sit together every day, then think about mode shifting. Watch something, read something, ask the reader, watcher to write something next. So I want you to watch this video, and again, you can use any of those platforms that I mentioned. You can post up a video and have a discussion under it and say, I want to pose a single question. What do you think of this idea for how you might apply this in work at your company next week? And this is a great question to ask, and you get really interesting results, and it forms a dialogue instead of a monologue. And so that's the way I would think about better connecting, how you get the message shorter. My only other thing is the idea that there's massive amounts of bad information is a beautiful thing. It's a painful reality of the connected world that we live in today, and it's a beautiful example of why we need to teach critical thinking better. When somebody says this is so, I want to know why, and who said it, and why did they say it, what are their motivations, and who funded that study, and what is their motivation for funding that study? Why did that outcome, so if I think about critical thinking, I can teach students to be trained, healthy, scientific skeptics of information that they're going to find all over the web.
Question on the left.
Yeah, you have, in one of your slides, you showed a curve that showed the effect of the increasing trend of federal spending per student, and you mentioned that it didn't show much correlation with the level of math and science. I was wondering if in that curve you adjusted it for inflation or not?
Yes, my understanding from the source of that, which came from an investment bank called Global Silicon Valley Capital, that those dollars are adjusted for inflation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, in the middle.
Yes. There seems to be a polarized attitude towards moving to online learning. I was just wondering, what are some strategies to best overcome that?
Tell me what you mean by polarized.
So you're either really excited about it or you're very against it.
Okay. And I do think there's polarizing views. It's funny, I was talking earlier, in the corporate world, we call it collaborative learning. In the academic world, that's called cheating. And I think that's best reflective of those polarized views. I believe that the polarization will take care of itself when two things happen. And that is, one, time must pass, and there are people in the baby boom generation, of which I am one of, that are just not going to buy in, and they're going to, until that whole cohort generation leaves or tends to become diminished over time, their views may never change. And number two, we've got to produce way better outcomes. So people keep talking about big data and learning analytics and MOOCs, and they hear all that. I was with a group of academics, leaders at a real large university about a week ago, and somebody said to me, I'm sick of this big data, I'm sick of this learning analytics. I hear all that. Give me one example where anybody learned something that changed something in teaching and learning as a result of that. And I would say, we need a lot more work. We need to run more experiments. We in this room have the opportunity to be on the cutting edge of practice to demonstrate a way forward. And I think we can demonstrate a way forward that is powerfully engaging, that is transformational in learning outcomes, that we can use that to create blended and hybrid solutions that change everything, that are experiential, integrated with work, collaborative learning pedagogies that cause the people to work together, solving complex problems, working on generating ideas, working on capturing knowledge for later reuse, or teaching them the leadership skills and how to be a leader teacher. So this is a beautiful thing. We learned something, and my job is to now go pay it forward. I must go teach others, and then they must pay it forward. And so that's a beautiful world. I think when we demonstrate the way, the people on the polarized, the view that this is wasteful, will be changed. And for those that won't be changed, I think that this generation coming in, the cohort after the baby boomer, Gen X, Gen Y, millennial, they're demanding this. We see it every day in the workplace.
Unfortunately, our time is up. Let's thank Alan for a thought-provoking talk.
Thank you.